least it will hopefully be at least a starting off point. I have a tendency to talk a lot, and sometimes that means we go right up against the hour. So just because I have so many things that I want to always share with y'all. So if at 11 o'clock you have to leave, check out, got to go do something else, please feel free to exit the room. I won't be mad. I'm not upset. I try to keep it at 50 minutes so that we can have some time for questions and answers. That doesn't always happen, but I will obviously stay around afterwards. So if folks can stay after and want to chat more, please feel free to do so. My email is also in the chat box. So if you have questions, comments, other things, definitely shoot me an email and let me know. So this morning we're talking about microaggressions. On the scale of microaggressions, maybe we think of it like a pyramid or a hierarchy. These are sort of things that are like bubbling a little bit to the top in terms of racism, sexism, any form of prejudice. They're perhaps not the most overt things in the world. Sometimes they can be, but they pop up, and they're some of the most common forms of discrimination that we do see, and we don't always know that we're doing it. But some really common microaggressions are saying things like, you don't talk like you're Black, or you can't be Hispanic because you're too white, or but you all look alike. Can I touch your hair? You're pretty in an exotic way. Where are you really from? Nurse, can you find me a doctor? Do you speak English? Are there any doctors from America here? These are all just forms of microaggressions, but also a very, very, very tiny snippet of them. Microaggressions sometimes can be really hard to notice, especially if we're not familiar, or sometimes new ones pop up, new forms, new ways of saying things pop up, particularly things like, if you've ever heard the concept of dog whistling, a lot of those can be microaggressions in a way, but the dog whistle is that it's designed so that, much like a dog whistle, only a dog could hear it, but much like someone who is also someone who has a lot of prejudice will be able to notice it and pick up on it and be like, oh yeah, I hear what they're saying, or I know what they're saying, or I'm picking up what they're laying down. So this morning we're going to talk about just defining a microaggression, how to identify them, how to give feedback on them. We're going to talk a little bit about diversity resistance, and then how to challenge diversity resistance. So microaggressions have been around forever. They really came to light in terms of terminology and scientific study in the 70s by a doctor named Chester Pierce at Harvard. And he really described them as like, these are the subtle cumulative mini assaults that are the substance of today's racism, in highlighting that it's not always the most obvious things that are racist, or it's not always the most easily detectable overt actions that we're seeing anymore. We still see those, absolutely. It's just that we are seeing smaller slights, or we're seeing things on a smaller scale or on an everyday scale. And so really they're the modern face of any ism. We're going to focus probably a lot today on racism. Most of our examples will be about racism. We'll also talk about other ones, such as ones rooted in heteronormativity or sexism. So they are the modern face of any ism. A microaggression was then defined by Gerald Wing Sue, who's at Columbia University, as brief, everyday exchanges that send denigrating messages to a target group. These can include everyday slights, indignities, put-downs, insults that are directed towards individuals of color, women, LGBT folks, any marginalized population. They're typically verbal comments or statements. Any physical behaviors or actions could be qualified as a microaggression. Those typically are going to reach the more like just they're macroaggressions, but sometimes there are individuals who might ask a woman of color, like, oh, can I touch your hair, because they think it's so exotic looking. And that's absolutely a microaggression. Like, that's a form of racism. So that would be a physical behavior. Even things like if I'm walking down the street and I see perhaps two Black men walking in the same direction as me, or walking toward me, and I move to the other side of the street, that's a microaggression. That's a microaggression right there. So they are typically verbal comments or statements. They can be physical behaviors or actions. We're going to focus mostly on the verbal comments and statements this morning. The term microaggression can be kind of confusing because it's like, but wait a second, why is it called aggression? Isn't aggression only a physical act? The word aggression actually means hostile or violent behavior or attitudes toward another. We typically use the term aggression in a physical sense, but the term microaggression is really just extremely small, hostile or violent behavior or attitudes towards another. These can look like name calling, avoidant behavior, purposeful discriminatory actions. So microaggressions in the research often get broken down into micro assaults, micro insults, micro invalidations. For the purpose of this, we're just going to focus on the broad pattern of them. We're not going to focus on the difference between a micro assault versus a micro insult versus a micro invalidation. All of them are rooted in prejudice and discrimination. They do form a spectrum. That doesn't mean that one is more acceptable than the other. One might be perhaps less noticeable or less obvious than the other, but they are all still unacceptable because they are all rooted in prejudice. Like I said, histories of microaggressions, they're not new, but they were really the term was first coined in the 70s, and then Daryl Wing Su, like I said, who's at Columbia, has really done a ton of research on them over the past decade and a half. So he's really been a pioneer in conducting research on them, labeling them, categorizing, and looking at the impact of them. So he has fantastic, great work out there. Definitely check out some of Dr. Su's work. Some qualities of microaggressions, they can seem innocuous or they can seem innocent in the sense that it's like, oh, well, I don't think the person meant any harm by that. But that doesn't matter. The fact that it's still being said is because it's rooted in some form of prejudice, whether it's conscious or unconscious, whether it's just rooted in the depths of our brains or not, it's still there. So they can seem innocent or they can seem unintentional. Sometimes they're automatic, but not always. Sometimes they actually are very, very explicit. And when I say explicit, I mean like the content is very clear, it's defined, it's happening, it's intentionally happening. The cumulative effect of microaggressions is very, very impactful on folks. In the moment, it can seem like, well, the person can just brush it off, it's fine. Sure, that in theory, yes, but the cumulative effect of them is very harmful. It's been shown to impact the mental health of individuals, to cause depression, low self-esteem, anxiety, feelings of lots of self-doubt. The impact is measurable and very, very noticeable. So sure, in the moment we could be like, well, it wasn't that bad, but it's still bad. It still perpetuates prejudice and discrimination. Even a single microaggression can be harmful. The cumulative effect of them absolutely is harmful. So when we talk about microaggressions, they're all related in some way back to components of identity. Major components of identity include gender identity, sex, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religion, social class, age, ability. These are just the major ones, some of the major ones. It's not the end all. be-all list. But then we see that it's called the Matrix of Oppression, and it's from a book called Teaching for Diversity and Social Justice. And we see that the social identity category shows us who are privileged groups, who are targeted groups, who the ism is. So when we talk about racism, it comes back to racism, sexism, classism, ableism, religious oppression, ageism. It comes into all of these. And we see microaggressions for every single one of these. We are going to spend probably most of our time talking about microaggressions related to racism. Those are typically the most obvious and the most frequently encountered, but that doesn't mean that the other ones are not as important or should be ignored. But given today's socio-political climate, we really want to focus on addressing racism because it's always important. It's always important to do that. And there's this renewed, I think, interest in trying to address racism and anti-Blackness in this country, which is unfortunate because it's like, well, we should have always been doing that. But recently, a lot more folks are trying to get on board, which is a great effort. And this is, like I said, a starting point. So some brief examples. Microaggressions regarding race or ethnicity are the easiest to recognize. Like I said, Dr. Sue created lots of research on it. He's also really categorized some common themes that are seen in microaggressions. We're not going to go through all of these, but I certainly encourage you to check out his work. Like literally, you can just Google microaggressions, Sue, and everything you need will come up first. But perhaps a common theme is like an alien in one's own land. And the message behind this is that Black individuals, Indigenous individuals, and other persons of color are considered exotic and may not be seen as, quote, like a true American. So some examples of this are like, oh, you speak English really well, or asking someone like, where are you from? Like I mentioned before, asking to touch a Black woman's hair, or asking the question like, what are you? You look so interesting. There was a moment on the Ellen DeGeneres show about a year and a half ago where a comedian named Hassan Minhaj was on, and Ellen had a difficult time pronouncing his name. And he really talked about, well, folks can pronounce the name of like Timothy Chalamet, who's like a 20-year-old actor, but why is it so difficult for folks to be able to pronounce this comedian's name? And so these are things that we know, that we see perhaps frequently. We see in the news, like a really recent one was a professor asking a student to anglicanize her name, where he thought that her name was perhaps like going to be a little bit offensive in terms of English language. I can't remember the exact example, but it's not coming to me, but he basically was like, you need a more white name per se if you're going to make it. And we see this as like this theme of an alien in one's own land, when like even folks who have grown up here or have been here for a long time, have lived in America for a long time, they might still be seen as foreign. We assume that white culture, when I say we, I mean like generally kind of in America, we think white culture is sort of the norm or the default, and everything else is a deviation from that, or a different permutation from that, when no, like that's not the case. That's not true. So these comments can be really perpetuating of this message that folks who are not white are considered exotic or may not be seen as true Americans, when they're just as American as you and I, or maybe someone who has immigrated to this country and has lived here longer than like I've been alive. So American is a nationality, but it's not always, it should not be the same thing as white culture. Another one we see with regards to race in terms of microaggression is color blindness. And like I said, whiteness is the dominant culture, where folks will say things like, I don't believe in race. There's only one race, the human race. All lives matter. And I think a lot of times we think like, well, yeah, absolutely. All lives do matter 100%. At the same time, the phrase Black Lives Matter is not saying that only Black lives matter or Black lives are more important. The phrase is literally trying to say like, hello, Black lives matter. Like, let's stop murdering Black people in a systemic fashion from the police. Like, it's not that they're more important or that they are the most special group. It's like Black Lives Matter is like almost the minimal the statement is asking for, like, pay attention. So when we say comments like, I don't believe in race, or there's only one race, the human race, all lives matter, we're ignoring the experiences of individuals. We're ignoring the unique experiences of individuals of color or Native Americans and indigenous folks. There is only one race, the human race. That is correct. And at the same time, we have to recognize that the experiences of people with skin that are not perceived to be white can be very different. And we need to recognize and honor that and really seek to know the experiences of those folks. So these are microaggressions that we see. All Lives Matter is probably a really common one that we see right now. With regards to sex, microaggressions are often rooted in sexism and toxic masculinity. The message here is that men are superior, women must conform and be controlled. A common one is interrupting a female colleague during a meeting, or saying something to a woman like, you should smile more. Or if a female identified individual is having a reaction to something and we say, you are overreacting. No, that person's not overreacting. Their reaction is their reaction. Who are we to determine if they're overreacting or not? So some of these microaggressions perpetuate the emotionality of women, or that women need to smile in order to be considered acceptable in society, or that their opinions aren't valued enough, therefore we can interrupt them because of male privilege. Other ones that we see with regards to gender are restrictive gender roles, maybe calling a woman who wears pants and a flannel shirt as being butch or being not feminine enough. The boys will be boys is absolutely a microaggression. That's kind of a tricky one because that's not directly, that one's not directly targeting a group other than giving a free pass to men by being like, well, boys will be boys, that they do get a free pass. Or saying to someone like, oh, I have no idea that you are transgender. Well, okay, like, are you the know-it-all of all individuals' identities? Like, there's a reason why you didn't know. You don't need to know some of these things. So these are some other microaggressions we'll see. With regards to sexual orientation, comments like, who's the man in the relationship? Or you don't need to shove your gayness in our faces. I don't go up to a heterosexual couple and say, who's the man in your relationship or who's the alpha in your relationship, because it doesn't matter. In fact, in my parents' relationship, my mom's the one who's in charge. She's just, no offense to my dad, she's just the smarter of the two. So she's often experienced microaggressions and discriminations when she's the one who's like, all right, I'm going to go buy a car. And then at the car dealership, folks are like, do you need your husband's permission to be here, or should you consult with him? And then she has a epic comeback for every single incident. And it's honestly pretty awesome to watch. But when we say things like, you don't need to shove your gayness in our faces, well, no one's shoving it in your face. What about we don't say you don't need to shove your straightness in our faces. So when we swap out some of these terms for ones that align with like the norm or the majority culture, they don't make sense, or they sound weird, or they sound strange. So that's one way of identifying microaggressions that we'll talk about in a sec. Like I said, identifying microaggressions. First of all, we're not going to be able to learn everything we need in this PowerPoint today on how to identify them, know them. Y'all have got to learn and read. And I am by no means saying that I am the expert and know all things. I learn new things every single day. I'm reading new things all the time because it's our job and responsibility. As a white man, it's my job and responsibility to educate myself, as opposed to having marginalized populations or minoritized folks be the ones to educate me. So learn and read. I love this meme, hit the books, they don't hit back. Learn and read, learn context, read history, learn truth, read different perspectives, learn what's not in front of you, read about other voices. There's a book right now that's pretty popular. It's called White Fragility. It's by an author. Her first name's Robin. I can't think of her last name. She's a sociologist. It's a great book, and it's written by a white woman. There's nothing wrong with white women, but we need to be able to read about perspectives from Black men, Black women, Black trans folks, Indigenous folks, other people of color, hear about their perspectives, and not just this one white woman's take on white fragility. So White Fragility the book is a great starting place, talks a lot about cool things that, well, I shouldn't say cool, talks about a lot of really interesting things we need to know if you're a white person. And at the same time, it is the tiniest tip of the iceberg. So we need to read about perspectives from different folks. Thank you, White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. 1, 2, 3, 4 people let me know. Good job, everybody. Really impressed. Thank you. Identifying microaggressions. When it comes to that, really the most accurate assessment is going to be if a marginalized person, a marginalized individual, or a marginalized population tells you that's a microaggression or that's inappropriate. Those who enjoy privilege and power are not the best evaluators. So if I hear something and someone's like, Mark, was that a microaggression? Part of me might be like, well, maybe, I don't know. It could be, it might not be. I'm probably not the best one to answer that. Maybe I know a little bit more than other folks, but that doesn't mean I'm the end all be all. So those who enjoy power and privilege with a specific identity are not always going to be the best ones to identify and tell you, because they might be like, well, it really wasn't that offensive. Like, it was just a comment, or it was just a statement. We need to listen to people. We need to listen to our peers, colleagues, friends who have marginalized identities and hear what they have to say. We don't want them to be the ones who have to explain it to us. They might, if they're willing to, and that's fine, but look it up. If you hear something and someone's like, that's offensive, don't say it, or that perpetuates a stereotype, or that's prejudiced. If you have that relationship, you can certainly ask. If they say they don't want to talk about it, defer to them, look it up on your own, always continue to do research and information on your own. Another way is to observe reactions, see how dynamics have changed. Like, let's say you're in a staff meeting and someone says something, and then all of a sudden all of the women in the meeting are silent. Or you notice that the trans folks in the room are suddenly not talking. See how dynamics change. See how folks respond. It's not always about folks saying something out loud as a comment. It's that we need to pay attention to what people are doing, their nonverbals. Are they suddenly looking down, not paying attention, ignoring? Because sometimes people don't want to respond to them. And that's also their right. Sometimes they just are like, I'm going to ignore it and move on. Another way is, like I said, swap it out. So I think a classic one would be that you don't need to shove your gayness in our faces. When I go up to someone and say, you don't need to shove your straightness in our faces, it sounds kind of strange. And so when we swap some of them out, then we can see like, okay, maybe that doesn't make sense. Or if I say all lives matter, yeah, all lives do matter. And at the same time, Black lives do matter. But if I swap out, if I see someone with a bumper sticker that says support our troops, I don't go up to them and say all employees matter. That would make no sense. Like, we support troops. Well, that was maybe a bad example. Let's say our neighbor is going to be an astronaut and going up into space and says, hey, like, just send me good vibes for this launch to the moon. I don't say to them like, well, all jobs matter. So I don't really want to focus on you as an astronaut. Comments in the chat box says, Robin DiAngelo has gotten rich off her work on racism and gets paid huge amounts of money. So instead of buying her book, read it from the library and buy books by Black authors on race and racism. Amanda, thank you for that. 110%. Same with Tim Wise, absolutely. Both of them are white individuals who, they do great work. They are doing good things. It's also not enough. It's also from white perspective. So absolutely buy books by Black authors on race and racism. Buy books on critical race theory by Black authors. I'm trying to think, of course, none of them are coming to my head. I really just need to pull up my Amazon order list and I can tell you. Get those books from the library, borrow them. They are absolutely starting points. Alicia brings up a good point. It is what white folks absolutely are more likely to listen to white folks. That's a form of racism right there. White folks are going to listen to white folks more often. And it is sometimes on, for example, me as a white person to be able to do some of this work and not put the burden on Black individuals, Indigenous and Native American folks, other persons of color. And at the same time, we need to be able to hear their voices. So buying their books is a great thing. Bettina Love at University of Georgia has some great things. Carol Anderson at Emory wrote White Rage. I've not read that one, but I've heard amazing things by it. Michelle Alexander did. Honestly, I just need to look. While we're talking, I'll look up my Amazon list and tell you some ones that I've recently gotten. It is by no means the end all be all, but of books to get. But go out there and find them. There's great things. Janet just posted great books, 62 great books by Black authors. Fabulous. Please do it. Please, please, please. When in doubt, going back to identifying microaggressions, when in doubt, ask the group as a whole. I don't mean the group of like, oh, hey, Black women in this meeting, were you all offended? Toss out the question to the group as a whole. I'm having a reaction to the way this was phrased. Is anyone else having a similar reaction? Or saying something like, I'm just curious how other folks felt about what was said, because maybe you know something was wrong, but you're not sure why. If you know that it's wrong, validate that it's wrong. Maybe you don't have the exact words to describe why it is. Like maybe you're not sure of the exact specific language, concepts, etc., but you know it's wrong. Still validate that it's wrong. You can still validate that it's wrong. When it comes to microaggressions, we want to make the invisible become visible. That's why when we talk about dog whistle statements, we need to talk about them and make it known so that, oh, we know that this is racist or this comment is sexist. I'm established expertise and learn. I literally can't believe I'm saying this, but BuzzFeed, I know, y'all can laugh, you can all smirk at me. BuzzFeed actually posts some pretty powerful articles about the experiences of folks that highlight their microaggressions they've experienced or situations of racism, sexism, etc. They're really, really powerful and often directly from folks who've submitted them. When in doubt, Google examples. Also learn more about histories of identities. There are folks pissed right now about the Washington Redskins. Well, people are like, well, why do we have to change the name? Because it's offensive. We're using Native Americans as a mascot. And when we use a mascot, it's supposed to sort of like represent the team and strengthen the team's image. But we're perpetuating Redskin as like a warrior, as a fighter. And that's incredibly offensive. And I also want to point out that Amanda in the chat box said, Teen Vogue is great too. 110% yes. I can't believe I'm saying this, but Teen Vogue has just had some of the most amazing articles about the experiences of marginalized folks. Right? Like, where did Teen Vogue come in all of this? But they have had some amazing articles, incredibly powerful articles that really interrogate systems of oppression, dynamics in America, really just some fantastic, powerful arguments as to why something is racist or a system is oppressive. Sometimes they're even better written than like the New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, etc. Oh, and they hired a Black woman editor. That's what happened. Didn't know that. Thank you. See, I learned things as well. And Ryan also posted a link to suggested reading from the library. Thank you so much for that. I'm actually going to copy that link and save that for myself as well, because I'll check that out. So thank you, everybody, for posting things in the chat box, putting things together. There's another author that's been posted, and I'm going to butcher his name, Ibram X. Kendi. I think he wrote a book on how to be anti-Black, how to be anti-racist is what it is. And that has been a really, really, I've seen that on a lot of like recent bestseller lists. So thank you for posting that. Thank you everybody for posting those. When it comes to identifying microaggressions, if you identify something later, like for example, for me, I'm sometimes on like a delayed reaction where 30 minutes later, I might be like, oh yeah, that was a racist comment or that was a sexist comment. It's not the end of the world. Come back to it whenever possible. If you're teaching, come back to it next class. Send out an email. Address it whenever possible with the person. Give them feedback. If it's not possible, remember it to educate folks. I say that in the sense of like, it's okay to not be perfect at identifying them because it's hard and it's so woven deeply in the tapestry of our culture that we don't always recognize them. But as an educational moment, we can teach folks to come back and say like, I didn't recognize this in the time, I did more research on it, and now I know why this statement is offensive or why this statement is inappropriate. Let's talk about it, or let's talk about the reasons why it is. Always circle back to it. It's never too late. I swear it's never too late. When it comes to micro-resistance, this is what I would call addressing microaggressions. Like, we need to resist them in the same capacity. So these are small instances of resistance to combat them. First of all, we've always got to talk about ourselves receiving feedback. I will be the first one to say that feedback is hard. It sucks. But take a deep breath, hold back your defensiveness. Being dismissive helps no one. There's a reason why this person's telling you something. It's because what you've said is so egregiously harmful, or maybe they care about you, or maybe they want to make it known that this is inappropriate. It doesn't matter the reason. They're letting you know for a reason. The reason doesn't have to matter to you, but they're letting you know. Believe people when they tell you. I don't think there's like false reportings of microaggressions. I don't think that's a thing. So believe them when they say it. There's a reason why folks are telling you. Ask open-ended questions, listen to the feedback. Open-ended questions are, okay, so I hear what you're saying. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Or what maybe does that statement perpetuate? Or how is that statement actually a microaggression? Asking just open questions to get information if that person's willing to share it with you. And again, if they don't want to, that's okay. We can't be mad about that. But listen to the feedback and then go look up more information on it. Go Google more information why. Ask someone else. Don't microaggress to cover up your initial microaggression. Like, don't say that wasn't a microaggression. That's literally a form of gaslighting. Or saying something like, it was a joke, calm down. Well, there's a reason why you said the joke, because to some extent it's true. I don't say like, why did the alien cross the road? Like when I say alien, I mean like green Martian. Why did the Martian cross the road to get to the other side? That doesn't even make sense. So stupid. But so many jokes have some semblance of truth in them. That's why they're funny. But that doesn't make it okay. So when we say it was a joke, calm down, we're still perpetuating it to some degree. And also what might be a microaggression to one person might not be to another. And maybe that's just because the other person doesn't see it as a microaggression, or maybe they didn't fully hear it, or maybe they don't understand the context of it. That doesn't matter. Don't say something like, well, I said that earlier and my other Black colleague didn't say something about it. Again, that's being defensive. Like, it doesn't matter. What is a microaggression is still a microaggression, whether or not 100 people before haven't said something. That doesn't make it okay. Work to repair that relationship. Apologize. Be sincere. Say, thank them. Thank you for letting me know. Thank you for letting me know. I'm going to find out more information about this. It's hard to get feedback about microaggressions. It sucks, but we also have to do it. We ourselves have to apologize. We have to do better about them. So work to repair that relationship. Say something like, I appreciate you letting me know, and I hope in the future you will continue to give me feedback when it's appropriate, or when it's warranted, or when you hear something, or thank you so much. I would love to be able to have a conversation about this and hear more about it if you're open, if you're willing. Work to repair that relationship. It's not on the other person to repair the relationship. It's on you because you have said something that is offensive. Negotiate. I don't know what this means. Negotiate you a bridge forward. Probably it's supposed to be negotiate a bridge forward. And like I said, asking them like, can we chat about this in the future? Can we talk more about it? Can I read up some on it and can we discuss it later? And if they say yes, great. If they say no, don't be mad. Just be like, okay, regardless, I still appreciate you letting me know. And thank you. And move on, work to do better, and continue to evaluate your own biases and reactions. Feedback for again, for yourself. Trust the other individual as an expert, but don't make them your tutor. So for example, if I make a joke about the Trail of Tears and someone says that's a microaggression, okay, but why is the Trail of Tears joke considered appropriate? I need you to explain and defend it right now. I need you to tell me a history of everything. If they want to, they can, but they're not your tutor. So I know I said you can ask them for more information, but there's a difference between asking about one thing and then something like in this situation, why is a Trail of Tears joke considered inappropriate? Well, the Trail of Tears is literally human genocide. And if you don't know why human genocide is wrong, then you need to read more books. you need to go back to American history or take a different American history class. They should not have to tutor you on why genocide is wrong. They should not have to tutor you on why the systemic removal and relocation of Native Americans in the United States is problematic. Continue to find ways around making assumptions and labels. Be a leader and demonstrate willingness to engage. I think that could be really powerful if you're in a meeting or in a class and someone says, hey, what you said was offensive, and you take it in stride and you say, thank you for letting me know. I had no idea. I'm going to look more into it, and I will continue to evaluate that, and so I can do better. That would be so cool to see. Instead, we see folks like, no, that wasn't a microaggression. Like, no, you're just overreacting. No, what I said is fine. Like, own up to it. I think that would be so powerful to witness and see, and like, wow, like, I would love to see like government leaders own up to things and be like, yeah, I screwed up. I said that wrong. I'm going to go and learn more about it, as opposed to being like gaslighting or spinning it in some way. In any situation, think about how you can use your power to impact the situation. So if you come from an identity that is the majority identity or not marginalized, how can you leverage your power to address it? How can you support those with less power? Maybe you're witnessing an interaction between two other people where person A said a microaggression and person B is giving feedback, and person A is being really defensive. Maybe you can jump in and say, whoa, let's listen to what person B has to say. We need to listen to them, or call out person A. Person A, maybe it sounds like you're having a reaction. I would really encourage you to just sit for a second and listen. Use your power, use your influence, use your capability to support conversations. We all have more power than we think if we are in a, if we have identities that are not marginalized, if we're in the majority culture. There are also strengths in numbers. So bring other folks in, loop other folks in. True allyship absolutely can cost you. It can make you a target, but that's what true allyship is that we have to sometimes sacrifice our privilege in order to support those who are being marginalized. That's how we're going to dismantle the system. Always avoid silence in addressing microaggressions. Silence perpetuates it. By default, silence will affirm it. Addressing issues, addressing microaggressions is going to be small daily tasks. It's not always this major daily event, large scale, all day thing that you need to do. Sometimes it's little things like avoiding silence, like saying something. Always avoid silence. When talking about feedback for others, make sure you foster an environment that supports growth and discussion. That comes back to you being a leader. If your students, colleagues, peers, you're not going to do what you expect of them, then what's kind of the point? If you witness one, acknowledge it. Also know the ramifications of the target as the only one who acknowledges it, because then it's like all the pressure is put back on them. Don't cut that person off, the person who has been the target of the microaggression, and say, I'm an ally, I'm here, I'm going to help you. No, validate that, hey, person A, what you said is inappropriate. The Trail of Tears joke isn't funny because human genocide is a very dark chapters of American history, and it still goes on to some degree. It's not funny because we're talking about human lives. So if there are ways you can jump in there and make it so that it's not solely on that other person, do that and navigate it so that you're not rescuing them per se. Like, don't be a white savior, but find ways that you can be an ally and support them and normalize that addressing microaggressions is important. Ask follow-up questions in the moment, especially if you're not sure. Maybe you could say, like, what did you mean by that? Or who are you referring to? If someone says a comment and you're not sure if it's a microaggression, ask them. And then once there's clarity, then you can say, oh, so you were talking about the Redskins, but when you said Redskins, you were actually referring to Native Americans and not the sports team. We don't use the term Redskins because it's offensive, because it perpetuates prejudice. So we generally use the term American Indians, Native Americans, First Peoples. Perhaps use that term instead. So ask follow-up questions to get more information when you feel like it's needed. Set up norms that allow for dialogue. And I'm sorry that we're flying through this because we haven't even hit diversity resistance yet. We do love discussions if it's in a class, but this is also not a philosophical discussion of like one person's opinion, like, well, it's my right to say Redskins. Okay, we're not going to debate the intent of the perpetrator. We're going to avoid debates about who is right or wrong in the sense of, well, the Washington Redskins didn't change their name until 2 days ago. So until they have a new name, I can still say that. It's not about who's right or wrong. We know who's wrong. We don't want to get into this back and forth jury trial. We need to make sure that we are clarifying that it was wrong to say, and there's not room for interpretation on that. Like I said, avoid forcing the target to be the expert and the lone defender. Ask folks if they need a break, if they need time after. So for example, if it's during class or a meeting, and maybe you have that authority to call for a break, ask folks if they need one. If there's been an interaction, say, okay, do we need to take a 5-minute break and come back? Or if anyone needs time after to talk about and process what's happened, please let me know if you need time.
Hey, Mark.
Alicia has a question. Can we touch on being healthy and resilient as people who are accosted by microaggressions? Yes, that is also very difficult because the cumulative effects of microaggressions are known. It also requires being supportive, being in a supportive environment and having folks who are going to validate you and give you the resources that you need. So for example, maybe I have a colleague who just was like majorly microaggressed 3 times in the past hour during a meeting, and she has to give a presentation next. Maybe I ask, can I do the presentation for you so that you're able to have time and space to process what's going on, or to have space to focus on yourself, or kind of maybe like borrowing some of the load to give them space to what they need to do. But let's maybe swing back to that at the very end, because that's a very, very important question, but also one that probably cannot be answered in 10 seconds. So we'll come back to that, Alicia, I promise. Share context, explain why it's problematic, recognize that sometimes microaggressions are unintentional, sometimes they might be, and know the negative impact of them. So we don't need to have like a guillotine ready to go for someone who microaggresses because maybe they didn't know it. But at the same time, we're not going to give them a free pass on that, okay? Sometimes folks will deny and say that it wasn't offensive. Avoid the conspiracy of silence. It doesn't matter if they deny it, like, we still have evidence that it is inappropriate. A person in a murder trial is going to be like, well, I didn't do it. Well, we have video of you murdering this person. And we all agree that murder is wrong. So we're going to avoid the conspiracy of silence. Maybe it's not even the time and place to really, truly have a deep conversation with the perpetrator in that moment. So think about, is this the time to in-depth address it? Still address it in the moment, but maybe it's not time for a full discussion on it. So maybe you need to talk about it later. Maybe you're also having reactions and maybe you're not in the spot to effectively respond to it. So maybe you need to send an email later or bring it up at the next meeting. Share your reaction, avoid blameful language. Also know who you can help wrangle in if it's needed. Maybe a microaggression occurred between two people. You witnessed it occur between two people and no one else was there, but you know other people in the office or the department or the organization who can help you or are supportive. Maybe, and you let them know, not in a gossipy way, but this happened, let's be on the lookout for this, or let's make sure we address it next time. When it comes to diversity resistance, it's a tale as old as time. Diversity typically means change for folks, and change typically means loss of power, status, influence for those who are of a privileged identity or have power. If I have more, why would I want less? If I'm a gajillionaire like Jeff Bezos, why would I want to pay more taxes? So just know that diversity resistance is not something new. And I do want to pause and say it is 10:55, and just a reminder that if you need to peace out, please feel free to do so. Shoot me an email with any questions, comments, concerns, thoughts. America is really about like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. We have this narrative that like, well, anyone can do it. Anyone can jump in there and make themselves something they need to be. So a lot of times we don't talk about diversity because for some folks it seems irrelevant. Like, well, if you just work hard enough, anyone can be a millionaire. Well, that's not true. For some folks, it's safer to have this narrative of self-determination that we can all make our own paths and chart our own destiny, than to have a truth that not all humans are treated equal. A lot of people don't want to agree with that or acknowledge that. So it's safer for folks to be like, well, you just need to try harder. That narrative is safer for a lot of folks because then they don't have to discuss why they are complicit in oppression and systemic marginalization of folks. In general, white men are going to be the ones who are perhaps the most resistant to diversity. That's really, I think, prevalent and obvious in the 2016 election where, not to be political, but there are a lot of folks who are like, I don't want more minorities in this country. I don't want more people who aren't white because I don't want to be a minority. They don't want to be the thing that they're actively perpetuating and creating. Like, it's comical. Particularly white men in this country, I'm not out to get white men, but white men have a fear of no longer having a monopoly on the conversation. And a lot of times for equality, equity, inclusion to happen, those with advantages must surrender those perks. And so an example is if I have a say in every single person we hire because I'm a white person and I can make it about a boys club, why would I want to surrender that? Because that means I get to hire all my friends. Just to be clear, that doesn't happen. But for the sake of the argument, if that really is the case, why would I want to do that? Why would I want to surrender that? Why would I want fair hiring practices when it's more fun for me to hire my friends? People don't want to surrender advantages and perks. And absolutely applies to gender inequality, giving up power, applies to any sort of ism out there. We don't want to give something up because it costs us something. It means we don't have the monopoly, we don't have the power, we don't have the privilege. That's what privilege is. It's that unearned right we didn't do anything to get, and we don't want to give it up because it can be pretty great. It's great for me to not have to worry about being, it's great for me to not have to worry about my life when I'm pulled over by cops. That's something I don't have to ever worry about or think about. And I can't even comprehend what it's like for Black men to be pulled over by cops and be worried if they're going to be shot. That's not something I ever have to think about. Why would I ever want to surrender that? Why would anyone want to surrender that? But it's a huge problem in our country. So it's something that needs to be addressed. If we live in a society where everyone can pull themselves up by their bootstraps, shouldn't everyone have an equal chance at becoming a billionaire? Theoretically, yes. But we don't live in a society where everyone can pull themselves up by their bootstraps. People are like Kylie Jenner, and I literally can't believe I'm talking about the Kardashians in a professional presentation. Heaven help me. But people are like, Kylie Jenner, the first self-made billionaire. No, she's not. That's not true. Her family already has millions and millions of dollars. She's set up to become a billionaire. Like, she and I theoretically should have an equal chance of becoming a billionaire, but it doesn't happen. So we need to really recognize that the narrative is that people can equally, but the truth is it's not going to happen. So some major sources of resistance, resistance to change. We don't like things to be different. That's pretty clear. Loss of status quo. People want to protect their power. Intergroup anxiety. And this means that folks are going to be more concerned about getting feedback. They're going to start realizing, like, crap, I'm going to be held accountable for things, or I'm going to get more. If it's a boys club and we hire a woman, then suddenly we're going to get feedback that our boys club is incredibly sexist or just drenching in toxic masculinity, and we don't want that feedback. Some people think that racism, other forms of isms, other forms of prejudice and discrimination are of the past. People think that we're in a post-racial society because we had Barack Obama as our president. No, like, you bake a cake, that doesn't make you a baker. We have one Black president, that doesn't mean we're post-racial. Barack Obama was also had a Black father and a white mother. So truly not 100% Black, but because of society, hey, he was forced to live as a Black man and identify as a Black man. He didn't really get to subscribe to the power and privilege of having white skin, even though he has white family members. Other forms of resistance are that diversity works, helps everyone accept the majority. And that's true, is that the majority is in power for a reason, and diversity work helps everyone accept the majority. And people get pissed about that. Why does affirmative action exist when it helps everyone except for me as a white person? Is sometimes something we hear as a narrative in the media. Diversity training, changes, etc. There is always an emotional component to it. It's not just cognitive. Folks know it's going to harm them, but they also emotionally feel threatened by it because they know that they're not going to be in the same safe space that they were a year ago, 5 years ago, that it's going to cause them to be a little bit out of their comfort zone and more out of their comfort zone. So it can be threatening to people. We talk about toxic masculinity where folks don't want to address their feelings, particularly men. Well, they certainly don't want to address these feelings of feeling threatened, having to go through re-socialization in a way because it's scary for them. It's really hard for them. So the manifestations that we see a lot of diversity resistance can be, they can come in the forms of microaggressions. We see overt, subtle, individual, organizational. We see them come about in different ways: cultures of silence, retaliation, avoidance, silence, harassment, hostile forms, all sorts of things. People will do whatever they need to do in order to be resistant against diversity. What we notice about resistance is that the amount of change advocated plus the impact on that organization or system is going to create our level of resistance. So if the amount of change advocated is really going to bring about zero impact, nothing's going to change, there might not really be any forms of resistance. But maybe there might be a huge impact on the organization, and maybe it's more outward. Maybe it's more just we're changing things on our website, but change is not really happening on the inside. There might not really be a lot of resistance. So when there is a lot of amount of change, a high amount of change being advocated and a high impact on folks, we're going to get a lot of resistance. When challenging it, we've tried the empathy route. That doesn't work too well. We literally have said Black people are being murdered frequently, systematically by police. We get people who are like, well, what about Black on Black crime? Or what about white people who are murdered by cops? And we've tried empathy. Empathy doesn't always work, unfortunately. It's because no one report this to anyone who's higher up, but America, we are a very selfish culture. We are very individualistic and focus on ourselves. We want to know what it has to do with us, how it impacts us. If it doesn't have to do in either of those domains, we don't really care. We see that a lot with coronavirus right now. I think there are folks who are like, it's not a real thing, it's not an issue. And then they experience it from a family member who gets it. And then there's a turnaround like, oh yeah, this is actually a real thing. In focusing on change, we have to talk about the benefits. What are the benefits of the change that's going to happen? How will it benefit someone? How will it support someone or an organization? We also have to conversely talk about the costs associated with failing to address it. It's the benefits absolutely are almost like the flip side of the costs, but we have to make both known for people. So for example, let's say I'm teaching let's say it's a bizarre world where I'm a physician and I get to say, you have to be able to treat LGBTQ plus patients. The benefits are that you will be successful in your field. You'll get lots of referrals. Your organization, your practice, your hospital will have a sterling reputation. The costs of it are that if you don't, people will file ethical complaints against you or try to take away your license or not refer to you. We've got to highlight both for folks, and we've really got to cull and create this sense of obligation. Like, as a physician, it is your duty to serve all people. You take that Hippocratic oath. Or as a duty to our customers, we have to be able to serve them well. All three of these things have to come up in addressing diversity resistance in order to make folks make change palatable for them, which sounds awful, but that's honestly the truth. We need to, in an individualistic society like America, we need to tell folks, what do you get from it? How do you benefit? How is it going to impact you? Like, it's almost like telling a little kid, like, hey, you need to take this bath because otherwise, if you don't, you're going to smell at school tomorrow and no one's going to play with you on recess. Like, literally linking very obvious things together for folks, sometimes what we have to do, unfortunately. Those with power will always find ways to protect it. Policies might have loopholes, might not be evenly enforced. We'll see things like little effort or support behind some measures and initiatives. Fewer resources will be allocated. These are the times when we highlight this, make it known, call out language that has loopholes, address policies that are not evenly enforced. Or it's like, we say we're committed to diversity, inclusion, and equity work, yet our budget is $10. How is that going to make a difference? We need to highlight these and make these known. Have concrete guidelines regarding microaggressions. Maybe it's a requirement for the job. or it's a requirement in class, that we don't do these things, or this is what happens if it occurs. For example, if I take a science fiction literature course, I don't complain that all of the novels are fake. In the same way that if I am getting complaints that I'm microaggressing, I don't complain that the microaggressions are fake or they're not real, or that diversity work isn't real or isn't needed. It needs to be written into the language of job positions, syllabi, annual feedback forms, anything like that, where it can be concrete that diversity awareness, addressing social justice is a part of evaluation. We don't want to always try and convince people that racism is real, or convince them that sexism is real, but focus on what they gain from change and what they lose from not doing it. We don't want to treat them as a lost cause, but like, if you're in a class with a student and they're like, I don't think racism is real, you're not going to convince them in that moment. I'm being really honest. You're not going to convince them in that moment, but highlight what they gain from learning more about it or what they lose from not learning about it. We're not going to change folks overnight. Like, we live in the South. I could drive along some of the outer roads of Statesboro and talk with folks there. I might not be able to convince them that racism is real, but maybe there are things that I can do to convince them by saying certain things are wrong, et cetera. We've got to create a culture where racism really is wrong and it's being acknowledged and addressed. And it's more like, come to this side of the fence. The grass is really, truly greener over here. It's not a lie. The grass is greener over here and we have cookies. This is where people are being treated equal, and it's the right thing to do because all humans are equal. You'll notice things that sometimes there are delays in diversity work. So set standards, benchmarks, like within 3 months we will address this, or within 6 months this person will demonstrate these competencies. Because you'll get a lot of comments like, we need more training, or I feel unequipped, or I don't feel like I have enough resources, or I didn't know that. And some of that might be true. But this is also 2020. Wikipedia is like a few clicks away. And at this point, if people are saying like, I don't know why the N-word is bad to say, they know. They're just trying to cast some sort of delay or put up a smoke screen. We can look anything up. This isn't 1776 where we don't have encyclopedias online. Maybe people are like, I don't have enough specific training on what to do with problematic students. Okay, that's a really specific thing we can talk about. But if people are like, well, I don't think racism is wrong, or I don't see why sexism is problematic, they know. They just don't want to talk about it, or they don't want to address it. So find ways to make things more concrete for folks. Find ways to, if they're like, I don't have enough resources, these are the resources. Go look them up. You need to do it and figure it out. I know that sounds kind of mean and harsh and cruel, but like, what's the delay? If we can spend all day on Twitter looking at famous people, someone can spend 10 minutes reading about why racism is wrong in America. You don't need 10 minutes to figure that out. You'll know it pretty quickly. But again, there's reasons why there might be stall tactics. When having conversations with folks, small groups, not larger groups, sometimes are better. It allows for more accountability. It allows for more personalization with the conversation. Make sure there's always an agenda and clarity about things. It's not that we're going to talk about why racism is bad. It's we're going to talk about the historical implications, the current implications, the impact on folks, how it impacts you in the job. Like, make it very, very clear. Make it always about collaboration. We're going to figure out how, as a group, we can address this culture within our organization, department, school, team, etc. Workshops are not enough. I hate to break it to you that this workshop's not enough. Sending someone to a workshop on diversity is not enough. There must be a multi-phase movement. It has to be multiple things. It's got to be, I went to this workshop and then I followed up with a book, and then I am in a discussion group about that book. And it's got to keep going. Like, people want to be able to do check boxes because they think that's safer. And it's like, well, I attended a training one time, but that doesn't mean anything. You bake a cake, you're not a baker. You attend one diversity training, you're not multiculturally competent, or you're not truly invested in social justice. There's got to be lots going on so that we can shift the culture. That was a lot of information. That was definitely not a 15-minute presentation, and I'm sorry. That took us to 11:15. I apologize. That probably needs to be 2 trainings. But does anyone have any questions, comments, concerns, need elaboration? Toss those in the chat box. Happy to continue talking about them. If anybody needs to get out of here and jet, please also feel free to do that. I know it's Friday. It's well past our hour-long mark. If you have questions, also know you can email me. I will toss my email in the chat box as well. If I can spell, georgiasouthern.edu. You're always welcome to send me emails, questions, things like that. But I appreciate y'all being here and listening to that lightning blitz of a presentation. But yeah, if folks have comments, reactions, thoughts, I'd love to hear them. Oh, and we do have a question that we have to go back to. I have not forgotten about that. Alicia's question. But we do have a question regarding color blindness. Do you suggest discussing race versus species at all? Coming from a biology professor. Bridget, can you elaborate a little bit more on this? I think I know what you're asking, but I'm wondering if you can just clarify a little bit so I can make sure that I'm truly answering your question. While you're typing, I'm going to go back up to Alicia's question. Can we touch on being healthy and resilient as people who are accosted by microaggressions? Like I said, the toll of microaggressions is absolutely individual and cumulative. Find spaces where, I know it sounds cheesy and corny and almost like it's almost kind of a derogatory term, the way that the media has made it out to be. Find safe spaces. Find people who are of similar mind, similar values, that are able to process with you. Find spaces where you know you can be with people and not be microaggressed against. Find therapists, support groups that are affirming. Ask them, let's say, so for example, at the counseling center, I'll be really honest, we have mostly white clinicians. We do have a few individuals who are persons of color, and sometimes those staff are just fully booked. And so if someone asks about, let's say I'm a client and I'm asking about, my presenting concern is about being microaggressed or diversity issues or facing racism. Maybe I need to ask that of my therapist. Like, are you equipped and trained to address this as a person someone who's not of a person of color? Or do you know places where those supports are available? So maybe that involves networking a little bit to find those spaces in people. Continue taking care of yourself. The basics are always important. 6 to 8 hours of sleep, water, eating fruits and vegetables. We need some of those things to replenish our body, because when our mind is struggling a little bit, that can impact our body. The mind-body connection is huge. So if we can bolster and make sure our body is being taken care of, that can also really help our brain. So I hope that answers that a little bit for you, Alicia. Yes, Bridget, thank you. Yes. So Bridget's question is, do you just suggest discussing race versus species at all? Race is largely a social construct. Absolutely. Race is a social construct. When we say social construct, that means that we as humans have both overtly and covertly agreed to it. So for example, justice is a socially constructed concept. What is justice? What is it? It's not something that we know of, but it's something that we've made. And the same with race. There might be a planet out there that's really similar to ours, and they don't see a difference between people in terms of color of their skin. That's not to say that that is being colorblind on that planet, but maybe their society hasn't constructed that difference.